He ate while laughing. He went to the bathroom while laughing. He actually slept, though fitfully, awaking every hour or so, laughing. For a few of my coworkers, he was the only fun part of their day, but he frightened me. This was probably because I was the new guy, the green psych tech who still thought he could make a difference in the world. Apparently, most psych techs, that is, psychiatric technicians, lose their compassion barometer after a while. And eventually, a patient who spends every waking moment laughing is no longer disturbing because he seems harmless. He terrified me also because, for some inexplicable reason, there was something familiar about him. To this day, my family still doesn't understand exactly what my role as a psych tech was. It's simple. Keep crazy people from hurting themselves or others. But what did I do all day on the job? Well, sometimes I sat in a chair watching some insane person lie on a bed in a small white room. And if they became agitated, I would lock the door. Sometimes I'd lead art hour, and we'd paint or make paper mache. No scissors allowed, of course. Sometimes I'd turn on a yoga video for exercise hour. And sometimes I pinned psychotic maniacs down, so my coworkers could apply the restraints and the nurses could inject 2 milligrams of lorazepam. I never got used to it. I kept caring. And that's why I only lasted a year. The laughing man laughed me right out of that acute psych ward. Allow me to explain. There isn't much that is funny about mental illness. And I don't mean to be insensitive or flippant about psychosis, about how it can rip the individual and their families apart. But to my fellow psych techs, many of them at least, it was all that these patients were. Psychos, crazies, maniacs. I tried to see them as people. They are people. And their illness isn't the only thing that defines them. But in the acute psych ward, their illness is in full swing. And it's the only side that psych techs like me saw of them. They were mostly bipolar patients in the height of their manic phase, or schizophrenics having a mental breakdown. The laughing guy, I'll call him Aaron, was a schizophrenic in his early 50s, with an atypical form of catatonia. Most catatonic schizophrenics will sit motionless, staring off for days without eating or sleeping. I recall one patient there who would stand in the middle of a room, maintaining an impossible pose for several days. When his catatonia subsided, this patient explained that during those frozen moments, he fully believed that if he moved, the world would end. But as in Aaron's case, his psychiatrist explained it to me. Some catatonics don't remain motionless, but have repetitive, purposeless motions or actions. And Aaron's catatonic expression was laughing, non-stop. Aaron had been in and out of the psych ward for years, alternating between the state mental hospital and the local hospital, for there were some legal stipulations that didn't allow him to stay in a long-term facility. Later, I found out it was because no facility could handle his laughing for more than a few months at a time. When I started my job, Aaron had already been in this psych ward for 3 months. But, according to some of the seasoned psych techs, he had been laughing like this for 10 years. Like I mentioned, most psych techs found him amusing. And more than once I saw a tech putting his arm around Aaron, laughing with him, mocking the way his high-pitched, almost screeching laugh nervously drowned out any conversation in the room. But Aaron took no notice to them when they did this. His eyes looked straight through anyone who faced him, and he kept pacing in place when a tech tried to hold him, like there was some motor inside of him that never shut off. He paced like this all day, and to get him to eat, I'd have to pace with him, placing bits of food in his mouth as we went. We scheduled bathroom breaks for him every hour or so we didn't have to change his clothes. And this worked 50% of the time. All the while, he laughed his piercing, frantic laugh. It grated on me. Only after a week of being there, I dreaded going up those elevators, greeted by his incessant laugh as I entered that dismal psych ward. Aaron wasn't the most frightening patient I've had there that year. Oh, the stories I could tell. But perhaps the strangest, maybe even the most tragic, certainly the most personal. I understood that most catatonics had progressive worsening schizophrenia until they just shut off. But it killed me to know why this guy just started laughing and nobody knew why. Before I quit, I asked nearly everyone about his story and no one knew. Until I met Dr. Greenwald, an ancient psychiatrist who hadn't worked at the psych ward in years. I heard stories of this doctor, and from what I gathered, he was a kind, highly esteemed man who loved what he did, who didn't judge these tormented patients. Dr. Greenwald was probably my strongest inspiration for becoming a physician myself. And to this day, I remember the compassion he showed towards patients. The older nurses loved him, and when they found out that he was taking a break from his private outpatient practice to round occasionally in the acute psych ward, they were all thrilled. Meeting Dr. Greenwald actually exceeded my expectations, and I admired how he valued every interaction, genuinely caring about each person in front of him, even lowly psych techs like me. One night, a few weeks before I quit, I saw Dr. Greenwald exiting Aaron's room after his evaluation, and I had the feeling he would have answers about Aaron, answers about how he came to be the way he was. Graciously, he told me. The first time Dr. Greenwald met Aaron in the hospital, he recognized a few things. Aaron was a good-natured, caring guy who, not surprisingly, loved to laugh and make others laugh. Dr. Greenwald remembered him capturing audiences, telling the most hilarious stories that would have the whole room in fits. He hadn't had an easy life, but he weathered his burdens well, easily laughing at life's ironies, both large and small. Dr. Greenwald was unaware of any previous psychiatric history, though Aaron had married a beautiful woman who suffered from lifelong depression and anxiety. Because Aaron had such a strong desire to care for troubled people, these feelings drew him to his wife. Aaron wanted to fix her, and through it all, he fell in love with her. She quickly became pregnant after they married, and in time, gave birth to a healthy baby boy. Her mental illness worsened after the birth, thought to be postpartum depression, and Aaron became nearly obsessed with the study of psychology. Despite his efforts to fix her, she deteriorated, developing postpartum psychosis, and she began hearing voices, telling her to do violent things. Everything changed when Aaron found out his wife had killed his infant son. Upon hearing this, Aaron started to laugh, and he never stopped. After Dr. Greenwald finished his story, I sat there speechless, though not in silence, as Aaron's shrill laugh emanated from his hospital room. Dr. Greenwald sat there with me, and I caught a glimpse of emotion on his face. "Isn't it odd?" I finally said. "That he broke completely all of a sudden. I thought most catatonics have a long history of schizophrenia or something." I felt like an idiot as soon as my words left my mouth. Certainly, Aaron had some mental disorder to have been a patient of Dr. Greenwald's. Dr. Greenwald smiled at me like a loving grandfather. Some things are just too much for a human mind to handle. I guess that something so tragic could make just about anybody snap. What was his diagnosis when you met him, sir? I asked. He looked at me puzzled. What do you mean? When you met him, what were you treating him for? Son, he wasn't my patient. He paused. Aaron was a psych tech here. I worked with him for years. I was here the day his wife was brought in, strapped to a stretcher, blood covering her face and clothing. She was completely psychotic, deranged, uncontrollable. Aaron was working here that day. I gaped at him, my mouth wide open, and all I managed to squeak out was a bewildered, "What?" Dr. Greenwald sighed heavily. I imagine that Aaron knew he was about to lose his mind then. And suddenly he became what he tried so hard to fix. The irony was, I guess, too much. So he just had to laugh. Dr. Greenwald stood up and patted me on the shoulder. He had stayed much longer than he expected to, and I slowly stood up watching him walk away. As he exited the secured door, he turned to me and said, Strangely, you remind me of him. Before he, started laughing. You care a lot about these people, I can tell. They're lucky to have you. Mortified, it suddenly washed over me, the realization nearly drowning me. There was something so intimate and familiar about Aaron, and I could never explain it to even myself how I saw a piece of me in that lifeless shell of a man. That laughing, insane man. I had no response for Dr. Greenwald in that moment. But, bursting from my lungs came a terrifying, totally involuntary laugh. I turned in my resignation notice that same day.